Jacob Zuma will be in court on Friday. He faces 16 charges. More than 200 witnesses will be called by the state. Today, addressing thousands of churchgoers in eSekaleni on KwaZulu-Natal's north coast, Zuma called on church leaders to pray for peaceful elections and for the country's leaders. The former president has been visiting various churches in KwaZulu-Natal this Easter weekend. Today, he visited members of the Covenant Congregational Church. That's the same church that hosted President Cyril Ramaphosa on Friday. Zuma used the occasion to ask the congregation to pray for peace and unity in the country. He has also pleaded with the Christian community to pray for the upcoming 2019 general elections.
Ngifuna ngokuqala ngokubonga ukuthi nikwazile.
I want to thank you for welcoming the President of the Republic. Those of you who are religious have a responsibility to pray for those in power.
Ukuthi azokhonza kanye nani.
Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa has congratulated newly sworn-in Botswana President Masisi and has reiterated the country's commitment to continue working with Botswana on a wide range of issues. The two presidents will meet later this year at the 5th Bi-National Commission. Masisi, meanwhile, has vowed to tackle youth unemployment in his country.
The swearing-in ceremony in Parliament came after Ian Khama stepped down, having completed the constitutional maximum of 10 years in office. President Masisi, 55, is a close ally of Khama and a BDP veteran. He's a US-educated former teacher, UNICEF official and education minister, whose father was also a cabinet minister. As the vice president, Masisi took over automatically and is likely to secure a further 5-year term in the next coming elections in October 2019.
I, Mokwetsi Eric Yabitu Masisi, do swear that I will faithfully and diligently discharge my duties and perform my functions in the high office of President of the Republic of Botswana, that I will maintain the Constitution of Botswana and uphold the laws, and that I will direct my abilities to the service and welfare of the peoples of Botswana without fear or favor, affection or ill will. So help me God.
Botswana prides itself on good governance and rule of law, and the carefully managed handover of power comes a full 18 months ahead of parliamentary elections next year.
So, with the inauguration of Botswana President Masisi today, this means over the past 5 months, 4 countries in the SADC region have had presidency changes, but only one was through the ballot box, and that is in Angola. While in Zimbabwe and South Africa had their presidents forced to resign, and Botswana, as you heard, the former President Ian Khama retiring as his 2-year term came to an end. To discuss this further, we are now joined by political analyst Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, who joined us from our Pretoria studio. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Fikeni, this evening. First of all, Ian Khama resigning 18 months before the general elections in Botswana. I wonder whether the two immediate neighboring countries, Zimbabwe and South Africa, can learn anything from this, because this has been a rather smooth transition.
Well, I do think that they can learn a thing or two, because Botswana has had a long history of succession and regular elections. But at the same time, we should be mindful of the internal political histories of Zimbabwe and South Africa, because they had protracted liberation struggles, and therefore their politics and their socio-economic conditions are actually different from those in Botswana, even though they should be striving for smooth transition, and they should be striving for a smooth transition, especially when it is within the same political party.
But if you look at Botswana, for instance, they've had the Botswana Democratic Party that has been in charge since 1966. And that's the similar characteristics for these two countries since their independence or their democracy, whether it's South Africa, where we've had the ANC that has always been in power, or whether it is ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe for that matter. Why is it so difficult for these two countries to find a way to make sure that there's a smooth transition when it comes to handing over leadership?
Do remember that there are certain dynamics within liberation organizations. Some of those are different cohorts which are generational. In South Africa, for example, you have had during the Mandela era the Robben Islanders being the dominant cohort of leadership after 1994. And then thereafter you had the Thabo Mbeki representing mainly your exile political, and then Jacob Zuma representing the exile combat section of the ANC. Now we're seeing those who remained, who are referred to as exiles. But again, you do have factional battles which take place within those former liberation organizations, both in South Africa and in Zimbabwe, even though you have a one-party dominated system, as you have correctly pointed out, even in Botswana. But their trajectories in the period before their independence is quite instructive and has a bearing on what is happening currently.
Remarks that have been made by the former presidents of these two countries. The former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, describing his removal as a coup d'etat. He says that he was betrayed. While we have our former president, former President Jacob Zuma, who was speaking at a church function in Durban on Friday. He says that his 10 years presidency has not been peaceful, and he feels that he's being oppressed. I wonder then, when you look in the choice of words that's being used by these former leaders of these liberation movements, what one can read into them.
I do think that in both instances, they are feeling betrayed by their fellow comrades, and they felt that there ought to have been an understanding or solidarity. But that is not the case in Botswana, because it looks like their presidents do take their 2 terms and they retire without any qualms, and their retirement or post-retirement seem to be quite peaceful. But in this case, in Zimbabwe, you do have somebody who is well over 90 years, still wanting to run or still wanting to be involved in politics. And in our case, you do have the case of former President Jacob Zuma, who is facing a number of legal challenges involving corruption. It is those 2 reasons that some of these leaders are actually fighting even beyond their stepping down. But also they had extended their influence to a point of these patronage networks, which very often when they step down, they are disturbed, and they would have wanted to extend their influence.
And the fight continues even after they've stepped down, and one then wonders whether the incumbents of these two countries, Emmerson Mnangagwa for that matter, or even Cyril Ramaphosa for that matter, should be worried when these two leaders use the platforms that have been given to them and somehow feel that they can be sowing divisions within the nation. For instance, if you look at the message that came from President Jacob Zuma, speaking of himself as having been oppressed and this 10 years not having been peaceful while he was president of the country, or 9 years for that matter.
Certainly, these former presidents have a potential of sowing divisions or even creating instability within their parties, because they are fighting for self-preservation. There is no bigger idea or ideology that you might say they are pursuing. And it is for that reason that one has to be concerned about their role, not to suppress them, but what role they are playing within their own political parties, within the societies, to destabilize, taking advantage of the fact that they are given space to reflect. But their sense of feeling persecuted might also arise from the fact that if they have been involved in long, prolonged struggles and combat missions during their exile years, they often perceive many of the external threats to themselves as being part of giant conspiracies, instead of taking accountability in instances of this nature and clear their names.
Already we've seen in Zimbabwe that there is already a ZANU-PF breakaway. Those are sympathetic with the former President Robert Mugabe. I wonder though, do you think that that's a possibility in South Africa, where you have President Jacob Zuma, the former president of the ANC, who has previously said he will remain a member of the ANC and has also called on some members of the ANC not to leave the party, but looking into the message that he seems to be sending, and also those who are supporting him, and the NEC taking a decision saying that we will not be supporting the former president of the ANC when he stands for his corruption trial on the 6th of April. Can we read anything into that, and whether this could lead to a breakaway movement within the ANC?
I do think that in this particular instance, it's less likely because of the accommodation arrangement within the ANC. Perhaps if the current investigation into state capture start targeting a number of prominent leaders such as the Secretary General and many other members of the NEC, it might be that breaking point that they might be thinking and even contemplating breaking away. But in our situation, if the evidence that comes out become more embarrassing and more revealing of their role, it might be very difficult for them to start a new party under such cloud of irregularities or corruption.
Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, thank you so much for your time. They're speaking about the ANC, of course, the fallout that is currently taking place, and it's heard on former President Jacob Zuma saying that he feels oppressed and that his 10 years president of the country has not been peaceful. Let's go to a quick ad break, and when we come back, we'll return with the bulletin.